The Black-Herited. Title: Nigerian billionaire went silent after his poor pregnant ex-wife appeared as waitress at his engagement to another woman. 00045. Cinematic hook, brief 3-scene teaser. Scene 10:00:15. The camera swoops low over the glittering skyline of Victoria Island, Lagos, then dives through the floor-to-ceiling glass windows of the Grand Sapphire Hall. Inside, the world is made of gold and light. Crystal chandeliers hang like frozen waterfalls, each one dripping with hand-cut prisms that scatter rainbows across the polished marble floor. Champagne towers 5 bottles high catch the glow of custom LED installations. Afrobeats royalty and Nollywood legends mingle under the weight of 1,000 camera flashes. And at the center of it all, Nigerian billionaire Chinedu Okoye, 34, founder of PaySwift, Nigeria's most celebrated fintech empire. He stands on stage in a custom black tuxedo hand-stitched in Milan, tall and commanding at 62, and with a smile that has closed billion-naira deals and charmed investors across 3 continents. Beside him, luminous in ivory silk, is Chioma Adeleke, Lagos' most followed fashion influencer. 7 million followers, covers of every magazine that matters. Chinedu lifts a velvet box. The crowd leans in. He slides a 7-carat princess-cut diamond ring onto Chioma's finger. She gasps. The room erupts. Scene 20:15:30. Sudden, jarring cut. The music drops. The laughter fades. Chinedu's eyes move across the ballroom, past the toasting guests, past the ice sculptures, past the celebrity photographer, and land on a figure near the far wall. A woman in a plain black and white hotel uniform, heavily pregnant, 8 months at least. She is quietly clearing empty champagne flutes from a side table, one hand pressed into the small of her aching back, her movements slow and deliberate. Chinedu's champagne glass slips from his fingers and shatters against the floor. The sound cuts through the music. Heads turn. Chioma's radiant smile falters. Scene 30:45. Close-up, the waitress lifts her head. Her eyes, brown, deep, exhausted, meet his across the glittering room. It is Nkechi, his ex-wife, the woman who vanished 8 months ago without a single word, the woman he had hired private investigators to find, the woman he had mourned like a death. Her hands tremble against the tray, her lip quivers, Chinedu's mouth opens. No words come. The mighty billionaire who has never been lost for words in his life stands completely, utterly silent. Screen fades to black. Bold white text appears. What happened next changed everything. 0:45:105. Warm cinematic voice. If this story already has you gripped, and trust me, we are only getting started, please smash that like button right now, share this with someone who believes in love and second chances, and subscribe to the channel with notifications turned on. We bring you emotional, powerful, true-to-life stories every single week. Stories about sacrifice, betrayal, redemption, and the kind of love that refuses to die no matter what the world throws at it. Now settle in. This one is going to take you on a journey. Let's begin the full story of Chinedu and Nkechi. Chapter 1: The Lavish Engagement and the Shocking Discovery. 1:05:18:00. The Grand Sapphire Hall in Victoria Island, Lagos, had seen weddings, state dinners, and the birthday parties of governors. But on this particular Friday evening in November, it had never looked more extraordinary. Chinedu Okoye had spent 8 months planning this night, and no detail, however small, had been left to chance. The floral arrangements alone had been flown in from Amsterdam. White peonies and blush roses in towering arrangements that perfumed the air with something between a garden and a dream. Each of the 240 guests had been personally vetted. The guest list read like the credits of a Nollywood blockbuster crossed with the Forbes Africa Rich list. Musicians, tech founders, senators, socialites, pastors whose churches held 50,000 worshippers every Sunday, and a scattering of international guests who had made the flight from London and Accra and Dubai just to say they were there. The catering was handled by a team from Johannesburg. The champagne was vintage crystal, ordered 3 months in advance. The live entertainment had rotated through two Afrobeats headliners and a jazz quartet that played softly through dinner. And Chindu 6 feet 2 inches of quiet confidence in a tuxedo that had taken his Milanese tailor 11 weeks to construct stood at the center of all of it like a man who had decided at last that he deserved to be happy. He was 34 years old. He had built PaySwift from a rented two-room office in Surrey with 3 employees and a dream. 8 years later, PaySwift processed nearly 14% of Nigeria's digital payment transactions. Chinedu had been on the cover of Forbes Africa twice. He had spoken at Davos. He had shaken hands with presidents. He had everything. Or nearly everything. Kioma Adelek stood beside him in a custom ivory Lanner da Silva Amobi gown, her hair swept up in a chignon held by diamonds borrowed from a Lagos jeweler who had received more Instagram coverage tonight than he had in the previous year. She was 28, impossibly beautiful, and famous in the way that Lagos had invented not for any single achievement, but for an accumulated presence, a curated perfection that made 7 million people feel they knew her. She was warm when the cameras were on and sharp as cut glass when they were not. She had been with Chinedu for 14 months. She had been careful, strategic, and patient. And tonight, her patience was being rewarded in sparkling clarity 7 carats, princess cut, set in platinum, worth more than most people earned in a decade. To forever, someone in the crowd shouted, and the toast rippled across the room in a wave of crystal and laughter. Chinedu smiled. He kissed Kioma's cheek. He felt, standing there, like the narrative of his life was finally moving the way it was supposed to. It was exactly 8:17 p.m. when everything changed. He had stepped away from the stage just briefly, just to fetch a glass of still water because the champagne was making his head swim, and he was crossing the far end of the ballroom, past the dessert station and the ice sculpture of 2 intertwined swans, when he saw her. At first his brain refused to process what his eyes were telling it. The figure near the wall was a waitress young, slim beneath the unmistakable roundness of a very advanced pregnancy, dressed in the hotel's standard black and white uniform. She was clearing champagne flutes from a side table with the methodical care of someone who had been on her feet for many hours and had learned to work through exhaustion by moving slowly and deliberately. One hand held the tray. One hand was pressed flat against the small of her back. Her head was down. Her hair was tied back simply. Chinedu's eyes moved to her face. And the champagne glass he had just picked up from a passing tray fell from his fingers and shattered against the marble floor. He did not hear it shatter. He did not feel the champagne splash against his trousers. He did not register the startled gasps of the guests nearest to him, or the way the music seemed to stumble for just a half beat, or the sensation of Kioma's eyes swinging to him from across the room. Because the woman clearing those glasses was Nkechi Okoye, his ex-wife, the woman who had disappeared from his life 8 months ago without a note, without a phone call, without a forwarding address. The woman whose disappearance had sent him spiraling through the worst 3 months of his life, hearing investigators, calling hospitals, filing reports, calling her family in Enugu, who claimed with convincing bewilderment that they had not heard from her either. She was here. She was 8 months pregnant. And the mathematics of that, the terrible, inescapable arithmetic, detonated in his mind like a bomb. 8 months she had left 8 months ago, which meant... No, he whispered to himself. His voice was barely audible. No, it can't be. But it was. It absolutely was. Nkechi chose that moment to look up, perhaps because the sound of breaking glass had reached her, or perhaps because she felt his gaze the way you feel a change in temperature. Their eyes met across the sparkling chaos of the room. Hers went wide. The tray in her hands tilted. She caught it barely, saved the glasses, and stood completely frozen. 30 feet of space and a universe of shared history stretched between them. For 3 full seconds, the ballroom might as well have not existed. Chinedu felt his chest constrict. He felt simultaneously a dozen things: shock, relief, love, rage, grief, confusion, hope. He had not felt this many emotions at once since the day his mother died. His feet moved toward her before his brain issued the instruction. And that was when Kioma reached his side. She had been watching from the stage, glass in hand, and she had seen the exact moment her fiancé's face transformed from contentment into something she did not recognize and did not like. She was too experienced and too intelligent to ignore it. She crossed the room in 12 quick strides, heels clicking a sharp rhythm on the marble. Chinedu, her voice was low, social smile still in place. "What happened? Are you all right?" He did not answer immediately. His eyes were still on Nkechi, who had begun moving quietly toward the service corridor, head down again, tray pressed to her chest like a shield. Chinedu, Kioma's hand closed on his arm, firmer now. "Who is that woman?" Chapter 2: The Hostile Confrontation. 18003600. The thing about Kioma Adelek was this: she had not built 7 million followers by being passive. She had a talent, honed over years of content creation and brand management, for reading a room, and right now every instinct she possessed was screaming at her that the heavily pregnant waitress making for the service door was not just a hotel employee. She did not wait for Chinedu to answer. She was already moving. She crossed the room on instinct, the smile still perfect, the eyes already calculating, and she reached Nkechi just as the woman pushed through the swing door into the narrow service corridor beyond. Kioma caught the door with one hand and followed her through. The corridor was bright and unglamorous fluorescent strip lighting, the smell of food and cleaning fluid, the noise of the kitchen behind a set of double doors. Nkechi had stopped a few feet in, one hand on the wall, breathing carefully. She turned when she heard footsteps. Kioma looked at her, really looked. The plain uniform, the flat shoes, the swollen belly, the deep exhaustion written into the lines around the young woman's eyes, and something that looked unmistakably like fear. "Who are you?" Kioma asked. Her voice was precise and cold as a scalpel. "I'm staff, Ma," Nkechi said quietly. "I'm sorry, I'm going back to the kitchen." "You're not going anywhere until you tell me why my fiancé just dropped a glass watching you walk across the room." Nkechi kept her eyes down. "I don't know what you mean." "You know exactly what I mean." Kioma stepped closer, lowering her voice even further, which somehow made it more dangerous. "I have seen every face that has ever made Chinedu Okoye lose his composure, and I have never seen him look like that. Not once. So you are going to tell me who you are, or I will find out myself, and I promise you that will go much worse for you." A long silence. "I'm his ex-wife," Nkechi said at last. The words came out barely above a whisper. The quality of silence that followed was different from the one before it. Kioma's expression did not change. She was far too composed for that, but something moved behind her eyes, something hot and sharp and territorial. "His ex-wife," she repeated, "working as a waitress, at our engagement party." She let the sentence sit there for a moment, each word landing like a stone. "And pregnant." "I didn't know it was his party," Nkechi said. "I swear, I needed the work. I didn't know until I was already inside, and then it was too late. I was going to leave quietly. I'm sorry, I'm so sorry." Kioma looked at her for a long moment. Then she turned and walked back through the swing door into the ballroom. What happened next was not, perhaps, one of Kioma's finest moments, though she would, in later interviews, characterize it rather differently. What happened was that the stress of the evening, the shock of the revelation, and the particular genius that made Kioma Adelek so compelling to watch online, all combined to produce a confrontation that would be clipped and shared and dissected for weeks to come. She walked back to Nkechi, who had followed her back into the ballroom's periphery, still hopping to disappear, and she addressed her, loudly enough for the nearest 20 guests to hear clearly. "You know what I think," Kioma said. "I think you planned this. I think you knew exactly whose party this was, and I think you walked in here deliberately to make a scene on my engagement night." Chinedu was at her elbow now, his voice a low warning. "Not here." She did not hear him, or chose not to. "Look at you," she continued, voice rising, the social mask slipping slightly to reveal the steel underneath. "Standing there looking tragic and pregnant. You think that gets you sympathy? You left him. You walked out. And now you show up at his engagement party and think that he's going to drop everything and run back to you." The nearest guests had gone quiet. Phones had appeared, angled carefully toward the unfolding drama. Nkechi's eyes were bright with tears she was absolutely refusing to shed in public. She straightened her back, which must have cost her considerable effort at 8 months pregnant, and she said, very quietly, "I'm going to leave now, Ma. I won't cause any trouble." "You've already caused trouble." Kioma's composure cracked, just slightly, just enough. "You've ruined this night. You've made him look at you instead of at me on the most important evening of my life, and I want you out of this building right now." "Enough." Chinedu's voice came out harder than he had perhaps intended. It cut through Kioma's words cleanly. Every head in the vicinity turned. "That is enough, Kioma." The silence that followed was a different kind, heavy, loaded, full of the dawning awareness among 240 guests that this evening had just become something more than an engagement party. Chinedu looked at Nkechi. She had her head down again, jaw tight, every muscle in her face working to keep control of her expression. He saw her hands trembling against the tray. He saw the dark circles under her eyes that even the fluorescent lighting of the ballroom couldn't fully illuminate. He saw the weight she was carrying literally and otherwise, and something in his chest cracked clean down the middle. This was the woman who had sat with him on the floor of their first terrible apartment eating noodles because they couldn't afford restaurant food, and told him Pay Swift was going to change Nigeria. This was the woman who had answered investor calls from his phone when his voice was too hoarse from stress to speak. This was the woman who had sold her own gold jewelry, a set of bangles her mother had given her to cover the salary of his first 3 employees when the funding was 3 weeks late. This was the woman who had believed in him when he barely believed in himself. And she was standing in front of him in a hotel uniform, 8 months pregnant, being screamed at by his fiancée at his engagement party. He took a breath. "I need to speak with her alone," he said, to no one in particular. "I need 5 minutes." Kioma's face went completely still. "Chinedu." "5 minutes," he said, and the tone was not a request. He touched Nkechi's arm gently, the way you'd touch something breakable, and guided her toward the side corridor. And behind them, the entire ballroom dissolved into furious, fascinated whisper. On at least 14 different phones, the video was already uploading. Engagement drama was trending in Lagos within 11 minutes. Chapter 3, The Private Truth Revealed. 36005830. The side corridor smelled like linen and carpet cleaner. The noise from the ballroom was muffled here, a low throb of music and murmur that felt very far away. A single emergency exit light threw everything into pale green shadow. Chinedu let the door close behind them. He turned to face Nkechi. She looked up at him for the first time without the weight of 100 eyes on her, and in the privacy of this small, quiet space, she allowed herself, briefly, to stop performing. The exhaustion flooded her face. The fear. The emotion she had been holding back with both hands for the past 40 minutes. "Nkechi," he said. His voice was barely above a whisper. He did not know, yet, what he wanted to say. He did not know what he felt. He only knew that 8 months of not knowing where she was, 8 months of the particular, unbearable grief of not knowing if someone you love is alive or dead, had just ended in this fluorescent corridor, and he was not sure he could hold himself together. "You search for me," she said. "It was not a question. Across 3 countries, I called your parents every week. I hired investigators. Nkechi," I thought his voice broke. He stopped, tried again. "I thought something terrible had happened to you." "Something terrible nearly did," she said. He looked at her, the exhaustion in her eyes, the careful way she held herself, the enormity of her belly. "Tell me," he said. "Tell me everything from the beginning." She was quiet for a moment. She shifted her weight, one hand on her lower back. Then she took a breath and began. "Do you remember the month before I left? The emails?" He nodded slowly. "The threats. Someone was sending threats to the PaySwift servers. We thought it was a disgruntled former employee." "It wasn't," she said. "It was a consortium. 3 of your direct competitors who had pooled resources to destabilize PaySwift before your Series C round closed. They had people watching us, Chinedu. People outside our building. People who knew when you came home at night, what car you drove, which gym I went to." He stared at her. "The night before I left," she continued, "I received a phone call from a man I'd never heard of. He knew my name. He knew where my parents lived in Enugu. He knew I was pregnant. I didn't even know at that point. I'd only taken the test that morning. But he knew." She paused, swallowed. "He said that if I stayed with you, if I remained associated with PaySwift, he would use me. He would take me or take someone I loved, and he would use it to destroy you. He said it would be cleaner for everyone if I simply disappeared." The silence in the corridor was absolute. Nkechi Chindu's voice had changed completely. All the grief and confusion of the evening had shifted, reformed into something harder and colder. "Why didn't you tell me? Why didn't you come to me?" "Because I knew what you would do," she said simply. "You would have tried to fight them. You would have doubled your security and your lawyers and your investigators, and you would have put yourself right in the middle of their crosshairs. And they were willing to hurt people, Chinedu. The phone call made that very clear. I couldn't let that happen. Not to you. Not when the Series C was so close to closing. Not when everything you'd built was balanced on that moment." He made a sound, something between a breath and a groan, and turned away from her, pressing his forehead against the wall. "So I left," she said. "I left without telling you so that you would search but eventually stop. So they would see that I was gone and you were moving on and there was nothing left to use against you. And it worked. The threat stopped within 6 weeks of my leaving. PaySwift closed the Series C. I watched the announcement online. A ghost of a smile. You were on the front page of Punch." He turned back to face her. His eyes were wet. Chinedu Okoye, who had not cried publicly since his father's funeral 9 years ago, had tears running down his face in a hotel corridor while his engagement party continued 50 meters away. "Our baby," he said. "Nkechi." "She's yours," she said quietly. "A girl, 8 months." She reached out tentatively, uncertain of the welcome, and took his hand and pressed it flat against the curve of her belly. "Her name is going to be Chinara. I already decided." He felt movement beneath his palm. A small, steady, miraculous pressure. He stood there with his hand on his unborn daughter's first home, in a polyester and emergency lighting corridor, wearing a tuxedo that cost more than some people's cars, and he cried. He cried the way men cry when they have been holding it for 8 months, and they cannot hold it for one more second. "I've been working 2 jobs," Nkechi said, her own voice unsteady now. "Waitressing and data entry from home. I rent a room in Surulere, near where we had our first apartment actually. I didn't plan to be here tonight, I swear. A colleague called in sick and they needed someone at short notice and the pay was double rate. I had no idea whose party it was. I didn't know until I walked in and saw the banners with your name." "Why didn't you leave immediately?" "I needed the money," she said. And the simplicity and the dignity of that sentence, the quiet, unflinching practicality of a woman who had chosen sacrifice and was living its consequences without self-pity, landed on him with the weight of everything he had not known for 8 months. "I was going to leave after the first hour," she continued, quietly. "You would never have seen me. But then the glasses needed clearing on the far side and I was nearest," and she shrugged slightly, which made her look, momentarily, like the girl he had married at 26. "And then you saw me." He looked at her for a long moment. "Come home," he said. "Chinedu, I mean come somewhere safe. Tonight you shouldn't be working, you shouldn't be on your feet. The baby and I have been managing fine." Nkechi. His voice was gentle but absolute. Come somewhere safe. Please. We can figure out the rest of it, but not tonight, not like this, please. She looked at him. In the pale green light of the emergency sign, with his mascara-smudged eyes and his expensive tuxedo and his hand still curved toward her belly as though he couldn't quite bring himself to remove it, he looked exactly like the man she had married. Not the billionaire. The man. The frightened, hopeful, imperfect man who had once promised her the world on a rooftop in Surulere and had been trying, in his flawed and workaholic and sometimes maddening way, to keep that promise ever since. You have a party, she said. I know, he said. And a fiancé. A pause, I know that too. He took her hand, he squared his shoulders, and he walked back toward the door. Chapter 4, The Life Change Choice. 58-31-18-00. The noise hit them as the door opened, music, chatter, the crystalline sound of cutlery on fine china, and then, as Chinedu and Nkechi stepped back into the ballroom together, hand in hand, the chatter died. 240 people, every single one of them watching. Kioma stood at the far end of the room near the stage, flanked by two of her closest friends. She had composed herself in the 5 minutes she had been waiting, and the composure was formidable. She was still the most beautiful woman in the room. The diamond ring still caught the light. She had, to outward appearances, regained total control. The moment she saw Chinedu holding Nkechi's hand, the composure developed a hairline fracture. Chinedu walked the length of the room with Nkechi at his side. He did not hurry. He did not look at the phones being raised on all sides. He kept his eyes forward, and he kept his voice steady. And when he reached the stage where he had stood 45 minutes earlier and slipped a ring onto Kioma's finger, he turned to face the room. I owe everyone here an apology, he said. The microphone was still live on the stand, and I owe Kioma one most of all. Kioma's expression was frozen in something that might have been described, in a less charged room, as a polite smile. Kioma, he said, turning to face her directly. His voice was quiet enough now that people had to strain to hear. You are brilliant and beautiful, and you have been nothing but good to me. This is not your fault. Nothing that is about to happen is your fault, and I am sorry, truly sorry for doing this in front of people. You deserved better from me. Chinedu, she said. Her voice was very controlled. Think about what you are doing. I have thought about it, he said. I thought about it for the last 5 minutes in a corridor, and I've been thinking about it, I suppose, since the day I met her. He looked at Nkechi, who stood a little apart from him, her hands folded in front of her belly, her face unreadable. This is Nkechi. She was my wife. She left 8 months ago to protect me from people who wanted to hurt me. She has been living alone, working 2 jobs, carrying my daughter, and I didn't know any of it. Silence, the kind that has weight. I can't put this ring on Kioma's finger knowing that, he said. It wouldn't be right, not to Kioma, not to Nkechi, not to myself. He reached out gently with great care and took Kioma's hand. He turned it over. He looked at the ring for a moment, and then he closed her fingers around it. Keep it, he said softly. I mean that. Everything we had was real. But this, he looked at Nkechi again. This is something I can't walk away from. Chinedu, Kioma's voice was very quiet now, stripped of its earlier heat. Just the two of them now, regardless of the audience. If you walk out of here tonight with her, that is it. There is no coming back. I know, he said, and I'm sorry. She looked at him for a long, searching moment. Whatever she saw in his face, some certainty, some recognition, she closed around it. She lifted her chin. She turned away. And in that turning, she showed everyone in the room who she really was at her core, someone with enough pride and enough strength not to beg. That, at least, he thought, watching her go, was real. He turned back to Nkechi. Can we leave? She looked at him, at the room, at the cameras. Chinedu, I'm still in my uniform. I know, he said. And despite everything, despite the cameras and the trending hashtags and the weight of the moment, he almost smiled. You can change when we get somewhere safe. Right now, I just want to get you somewhere you can sit down properly. He took her arm gently, carefully, the way you take the arm of someone precious, and together they walked through the parted crowd toward the exit. The room watched them go in near total silence. Someone, somewhere, started clapping. Then someone else joined. Then more. By the time they reached the main doors, a third of the room was applauding, not for the drama, but for something harder to name. Recognition, perhaps. The sense of witnessing something real in a world full of performance. The doors swung shut behind them. On social media, the world was already on fire. Chapter 5: The Drive. The danger and the past laid bare. 1:18:00–1:42:00. Outside, the Lagos night was thick and warm. The sounds of the city generators, distant traffic, a muezzin somewhere far off replaced the curated luxury of the Grand Sapphire Hall. Chinedu's driver, Emeka, was waiting at the curb in the black Range Rover. He took one look at his boss's face and at the pregnant woman beside him and asked no questions, which was one of the many reasons Chinedu valued him. "Where are we going?" Nkechi asked as Emeka pulled into traffic. "I have an apartment in Okoye," Chinedu said. "The one I kept for," he paused. "The guest apartment. It's quiet, clean. There's food in the kitchen. You can rest." "I can't just." Nkechi. He turned to look at her in the back seat. "You are 8 months pregnant. You have been on your feet for 6 hours serving champagne at a party full of people who eat more in one evening than most of Nigeria earns in a week. Please, let me do this one thing." She held his gaze for a moment, then looked away out the window. The city moved past the compound walls and the generators, the hawkers at the intersections, the occasional glimpse of the lagoon. Lagos, indifferent and magnificent as always. "Tell me about the consortium," he said quietly. "Everything you know." She told him. It took the entire drive and then some, sitting in the cool quiet of the Okoye apartment afterward with tea she hadn't expected to be so good, while the city hummed outside and Emeka waited in the car below. She told him about the phone calls. The man's voice educated, unhurried, distinctly Yoruba accented. The specificity of his knowledge about their lives, which had told her this was not amateur work. The instructions she had been given: leave Lagos within 48 hours, contact no one associated with PaySwift, make no statement, and tell no one, the man had said at the end, especially not your husband. His knowing would make you useful again. "I need names," Chinedu said. His voice was very quiet, very still. This was the voice, Nkechi remembered, that came before his most decisive moves, the stillness before the strategy. "I wrote everything down," she said. "I have a notebook. I've been keeping records since the beginning. Dates, times, the numbers they called from." She looked at him steadily. "I knew there might come a day when I needed them." He looked at her with something close to awe. "You were collecting evidence." "I wasn't going to run and leave nothing behind," she said simply. "If something had happened to me, I wanted there to be something left, something you could use." He was quiet for a long moment. "Then nothing was going to happen to you. Nothing is going to happen to you." He leaned forward, elbows on knees, hands clasped. "I have people. Lawyers, investigators, 2 retired DSS officers on retainer. By Monday morning, I'm going to know every person involved in this. And we are going to make sure this never touches you or Chinara again." "Chinara," she repeated softly. "You like the name." "I love the name," he said. "It means God has answered. It's perfect." She looked down at her hands, at the empty place on her left ring finger where his ring had once sat. "Chinedu," she said carefully, "tonight what you did in there, I don't want you to have done it for the wrong reasons." "What would the wrong reasons be?" "Guilt, obligation, feeling like you owed it to me because of what I did." She met his eyes. "I left you. I know what that cost you. I know you spent months looking. I know you thought." Her voice broke slightly. She steadied it. "I know what it does to a person to not know. And I am sorry for that, Chinedu. I am truly sorry. But I would do it again. I would make the same choice again because I believe it was right. And I need to know that if you came back tonight, you came back because you wanted to. Not because you pitied me." He looked at her for a long time. The city hummed outside. A generator kicked on somewhere below them. A baby, someone else's baby, cried briefly in a neighboring apartment and was soothed. "I had your ring in my desk drawer for 6 months," he said at last. "The original one from our wedding. Not the one from tonight. I bought that for Kioma. I mean your ring, the first one. The one I put on your finger in that church in Enugu with your whole family there and my mother crying so hard she had to be held up by Auntie Ngozi." He paused. "I took it out and looked at it almost every night. I don't know what I told myself about why I kept it. I told myself it was sentiment, nostalgia, that I was holding onto the past." She was very still. "But tonight," he said, "the moment I saw your face across that room, not even before I knew you were pregnant, just in the first second, just seeing you, I felt something I haven't felt in 8 months. I felt like something that had been switched off finally came back on." He shook his head. "That's not guilt, Nkechi. That's not obligation. That's—" He stopped. "Tried again. I've been very successful at a great many things in my life, but I have been genuinely lost since the day you left. And I don't think that's a coincidence." The silence that followed was different from all the silences before it, warmer, full of something tentative and fragile and possible. "I'm still angry at you," he added after a moment, "for not trusting me, for not coming to me." "I know," she said. "We're going to have a very long conversation about that." "I know," she said again, and this time she smiled, not the exhausted courtesy smile of the evening, a real one, the one he remembered. Chapter 6: The Dramatic Climax. Birth. 142:00 to 15:00. The plan had been simple. Nkechi would rest in the Okoye apartment that night. In the morning they would go together to the hospital for a checkup, because 8 months pregnant and 6 hours on her feet was not a situation any responsible person was going to ignore. Then they would begin working out what came next slowly, carefully, with appropriate attention to the fact that two people who had been through what they had been through should not make decisions in the immediate aftermath of an emotionally volcanic Friday night. The plan lasted approximately 45 minutes. Nkechi had eaten. She'd been surprised by how hungry she was, and then realized she hadn't eaten since noon, and she had changed into a loose dress from the small bag she'd brought to work. And she was sitting on the sofa in the living room with her legs up and her tea nearly finished when she went very still. "Chinedu," she said. He had been on the phone to his head of security, keeping his voice low in the kitchen doorway. Something in her voice made him put the phone down without saying goodbye. "Nkechi." I think she breathed, carefully. "I think something is happening." "Something?" "The baby." She looked at him with eyes that were entirely calm, which somehow made it more alarming than panic would have been. "I've been having contractions for about an hour. I thought they were Braxton Hicks, but they're not." "They're not," he repeated. "They're getting closer together," she said, "and I think my water is about to break." A pause. It just did. In the 4 seconds that followed, Chinedu Okoye, who had navigated a financial crisis, a board coup attempt, 2 hostile acquisition bids, and a Senate committee investigation, experienced something that none of those events had produced: pure, uncut terror. He moved. He did not remember deciding to move. He was on the phone to Emeka before he reached the sofa, telling him to bring the car to the front, and then he was helping Nkechi to her feet, one hand steady under her elbow, the other pressed to her back, guiding her toward the door with the focused efficiency of a man running entirely on adrenaline. "My bag," she said, "in the lift. In the bedroom, there's a hospital bag. Emeka can go back for it. Don't worry about the bag." "The notebook is in it," she said, "the one with all the information." Even now, even in labor, she was thinking about the evidence. He looked at her sideways. "I will personally guarantee the notebook's safety," he said. "Right now you are the priority." Emeka had the Range Rover at the curb when they came out of the building, engine running, rear door open. He drove with the focused competence of a man who understood instinctively that tonight was not the night for Lagos traffic caution. and they reached St. Mary's Private Hospital in Ikoyi in 9 minutes, a journey that, at that time of night, should have taken 20. Nkechi was taken straight to maternity. Chinedu followed, still in his engagement tuxedo, which was by now somewhat worse for wear. Champagne-splashed trouser leg, tie loosened, jacket abandoned in the corridor. The midwife on duty looked at him with the politely withholding expression of someone who had seen a great many things in this job and was going to do her work regardless. "Are you the father?" she asked. He looked at Nkechi. "Yes," he said, and the word came out with more certainty than almost anything else he had said all evening. "Yes, I am." What followed was the particular compressed eternity of a labor room. Time behaved differently there, stretching and compressing, the contractions marking a rhythm that had nothing to do with clocks. Chinedu held Nkechi's hand through everyone. He had not, to his knowledge, been trained for any of this, but he found that training was not particularly what was needed. What was needed was presence, steadiness, the willingness to be there without flinching, to be a fixed point while everything else moved. He told her she was doing brilliantly. He told her she was the strongest person he had ever known, and he knew some very strong people. He told her about a meeting he'd had 6 months ago, where a Japanese investor had told him PaySwift would never work in rural markets, and how he'd spent the next 3 months proving that investor definitively wrong, because Nkechi had always said that the villages were the future, and she had been, as usual, correct. He talked, quietly and continuously, through the hours of the night, about nothing in particular and everything, and she gripped his hand and breathed and pushed. And outside the window the Lagos night deepened toward its darkest point, and then, very slowly, began to think about turning. At 2:47 a.m., with the city still asleep and the hospital corridor quiet, and a single star visible through the high window of the delivery room, Chinedu Okoye arrived. She was 7 pounds, 2 ounces. She was furious and vocal about the transition she had just been required to make. She had her father's forehead and her mother's mouth, and she announced herself to the world with a cry that filled every corner of the room. The midwife placed her on Nkechi's chest, skin to skin, and Nkechi pressed her lips to the top of her daughter's head and did not say anything for a long time. She didn't need to. Chinedu stood beside them. The midwife handed him the scissors. "Would you like to cut the cord?" And his hands shook so badly she had to guide him, which she did with professional patience. When it was done, he stood there holding the scissors he no longer needed, looking at these two people who were the most important thing in his world. And he made a promise, not out loud, not with words, because words felt insufficient, but in the specific and absolute way that only quiet moments in delivery rooms at 2:47 in the morning allow for. "What's her name?" the midwife asked, pen poised over the record. Nkechi looked up at Chinedu. He looked down at her. "Chinara," they said at the same moment. The midwife smiled and wrote it down. Chapter 7: The Recovery, the Reckoning, and the Quiet Aftermath. 2:15:00–52:00. The next 48 hours passed in the gentle suspension of new parenthood, the particular time outside of time quality of a hospital room where someone very small and very new has just arrived and requires that the world reorganize itself accordingly. Chinedu had his assistant send clothes. He had a shower in the hospital's family room, changed out of the legendary tuxedo, and returned to Nkechi's suite in gray trousers and a white shirt, looking, for the first time in many hours, like a human being rather than a man running from crisis to crisis. He also, in the quiet hours of Saturday morning while Nkechi slept and Chinara slept in the hospital crib beside her, made some calls. To his head of security first, the consortium, the information, begin gathering. To his lead lawyer, second, formal legal process, construct it quietly, thoroughly. To one other number, a number in his contacts, listed simply as Uncle K, which was not his uncle at all but a former inspector general of police, whose son Chinedu had put through university without fanfare 9 years ago. A man who owed him precisely one favor. I need to call that favor in, Chinedu said when the call connected. Don't ask me where I got the information. Just tell me you can use it. A long pause, then send it. On Saturday afternoon, when Nkechi woke, he was sitting in the chair beside the bed reading Chinara's face the way some men read reports intently, as though there were information in it. Nkechi watched him for a moment without saying anything. You didn't sleep, she said finally. I slept a little, he said, which was technically true in that he had fallen asleep in the chair for approximately 40 minutes around 5 a.m. She studied him. You made calls. Yes. About the consortium. Among other things. She was quiet for a moment. Chinedu, promise me you won't do anything. I'm not doing anything reckless, he said. I'm doing everything through proper channels. The information you collected is extraordinary, Nkechi. It's going to proper investigators, the legal route. No cowboy moves. He met her eyes. I promised you Chinara would be safe. I don't make promises I can't keep, you know that. She did know that. It had been one of the things she'd loved most and found most infuriating about him. His compulsive fidelity to promises, which meant he rarely made them, and when he did, he moved mountains. There's something else, he said. She waited. Kioma called, he said, this morning. Something tightened in Nkechi's expression. Oh. She wanted to understand what happened, not the public version, the real one. I told her. She listened. She asked two very sharp questions which I answered honestly. He paused. She's angry. She has every right to be. She was also eventually gracious. She said she hoped the baby was healthy. He looked at Chinara, still sleeping in her crib. That took character. Not everyone would do that. Nkechi was quiet for a moment. She loves you, she said. Perhaps, but I think she also knows the difference between someone loving you and someone being in love with you. And she's too good to settle for the first when she deserves the second. Nkechi absorbed this, and the press. He exhaled, trending in 4 countries, 7 different video clips from the party, various angles. My PR team has been up since 4 a.m. He glanced at his phone, which had been relentlessly buzzing, and then turned it face down. I've decided not to say anything publicly yet. The story belongs to us, not to them. She looked at him for a long moment. Us, she repeated. If you'll allow it, he said carefully. I'm not assuming anything. I'm not taking anything for granted. I know that what happened last night, my walking out of that party, choosing to come with you, that doesn't automatically undo 8 months of you being alone. It doesn't undo the pain. It doesn't make everything simple. I know that. It doesn't, she agreed. But I'd like to try, he said, if you're willing, to do it properly this time. Slowly, honestly, with all the conversations we should have had before actually having them. A pause. I already told you I'm still angry about you not trusting me enough to come to me. And I told you I'd do it again, she said mildly. Yes, that conversation is going to be very long. She smiled. We have time, she said. And then she looked down at Chinara, who had chosen this moment to stir and make a small, indignant sound. We seem to have a great deal of time now. He leaned forward and very carefully lifted his daughter out of the crib. She was not, he discovered immediately, a fan of being lifted, and made this clear in strident terms. He laughed the first real, unguarded laugh of the entire night, and adjusted his hold on her until the protest subsided. And he stood there with his daughter quiet in his arms and his ex-wife watching him from the hospital bed. And outside the window of the private suite, the Lagos skyline was brilliant with noon light, and the sound of the city going on the way cities do, indifferent and magnificent and full of life. Chapter 8, The Second Proposal. 252-003-2500. 2 days passed. Nkechi rested. Chinara ate and slept and occasionally exercised her objections to the world at considerable volume. Chinedu appeared each morning, stayed each day, and left only late in the evenings, and then, Nkechi suspected, not very far. On the morning of the third day, she woke to find the suite filled with pale gold morning light and a very specific arrangement of things. A tray with the kind of breakfast she had always loved: boiled eggs, toast, sliced mango, strong tea with too much milk, the way she'd drunk it since university, fresh white flowers in a vase on the windowsill. And Chinedu, sitting in the chair beside the bed, in a clean dark shirt with his sleeves rolled up, and his reading glasses on. He had developed a slight need for reading glasses over the past 2 years, which he was still refusing to accept as a permanent condition, looking at something small in his hand. She watched him from the pillow for a moment before he noticed she was awake. When he did notice, he put on his glasses and looked at her, and she saw what he was holding. Small, round, a gold band with a single diamond, modest by the standards of his life, extravagant by the standards of any ordinary life. Not the 7-carat ring he had chosen for Kioma, something much older. Their ring, the one from the church in Enugu with her whole family there and his mother weeping. He had kept it in his desk drawer for 8 months. She knew it before he said a word. He set his glasses on the side table and got out of the chair and knelt on one knee, in the blue and gold light of the private suite, beside the hospital bed where his daughter was sleeping in the crib, and his ex-wife was looking at him with an expression he couldn't quite read. "I practiced this," he said. "I practiced exactly what I wanted to say. I had it all very neatly arranged in a speech." "Of course you did," she said softly. "And I've completely forgotten it," he admitted, "because seeing you just now knocked it out of my head." He looked down at the ring in his hand. "I kept this," he said, "after you left, when any sensible person would have returned it or locked it away, or I don't know, had it melted down and made into something else. But I kept it. I kept it because I told myself it was sentiment, nostalgia, some sentimental attachment to the past." He shook his head. "It was none of those things. It was because I knew somewhere underneath everything I was telling myself about moving on and building a new life, I knew that this ring belonged on your finger. Not because of obligation, not because of history, but because you are the only person in my life in front of whom I have never had to perform. The only person who knew me when I had nothing and loved me anyway. The only person I have ever trusted completely, even when I didn't know how to say so, even when my actions said something else entirely." He looked up at her. "I know we have work to do. I know trust takes time to rebuild. I know that what I'm about to ask might be too soon, and if it is, I will wait. I will wait as long as you need. But Nkechi Okoye, and you're still Okoye. I never changed the papers, which is perhaps a clue about how I was really feeling. I am asking you, in front of our daughter, if you will do me the extraordinary honor of being my wife again." He paused, then added, because he was still himself, "I've already spoken to your father." He said, and I'm quoting directly, "It took you long enough, boy." The sound she made was not quite a laugh and not quite a sob. It was something in between, something specific to this moment, to this room, to the sum of everything they had been through. "Yes," she said, "Chinedu, yes." He slid the ring onto her finger. It fit exactly as it always had. She had not worn another ring on that finger in 8 months, and he noticed. And he didn't say anything about it, because some things are better left in the space between two people. He stood up. He took her hand, the one with the ring, and held it in both of his. And then, because neither of them was given to excessive sentimentality, and because the moment was already almost more than either of them could hold, they simply looked at each other for a long while in the morning light. In the crib beside them, Chinara made a small sound of profound self-satisfaction, as though this was exactly what she had been expecting all along. Epilogue 6 months later. Final segment 3, 2003, 2500. The naming ceremony for Chinara Okoye was held on a Saturday morning in the compound of Nkechi's family home in Enugu, attended by 112 people, with no press, no cameras allowed inside the gates, no social media, and a playlist curated entirely by Chinedu that leaned heavily toward the highlife songs Nkechi's father played on Sunday mornings. The engagement party footage had, by then, been viewed 47 million times across various platforms. There had been profiles in 3 magazines, a parody skit on a comedy channel, and an extraordinarily earnest editorial in a Lagos newspaper about authenticity in modern relationships. Chinedu had declined all interview requests. Nkechi, who had her own rather developed sense of irony, had declined them twice as firmly. The consortium, 3 men, 2 companies, a web of financial interests were by then the subject of a formal investigation. The notebook Nkechi had kept for 8 months was with investigators and lawyers. The process was slow, as processes involving the intersection of business and law and government always are, but it was moving, and it would arrive where it needed to arrive. Chioma Adeleke had, 2 months after the engagement party, launched a new content series called Starting Over, which had attracted 11 million followers in its first 3 weeks, making it the most successful pivot of her already considerable career. She was, by all appearances, thriving. She had never publicly commented on Chinedu or Nkechi. Chinedu respected that deeply. At the naming ceremony, Nkechi's father, a retired schoolteacher with the slow dignity of a man who has earned every gray hair on his head, held Chinara up to the morning light in the traditional way and spoke her names. Chinara, for God has answered; Adiz, for daughter of the king; and Okoye, for the family she was born into and the story she would carry forward. Chinedu stood beside his wife. They had remarried in a quiet court ceremony 6 weeks after the naming. The church ceremony was planned for Christmas, and held her hand, and looked at his daughter in her grandfather's arms, and thought about the peculiar route that had led here. The glamour and the grief of it. The choices made in fear, the choices made in pride, the choices made at last in something cleaner and more honest than either. He thought about the ballroom, the shattering glass, the woman in the hotel uniform with her hand pressed to her back and her eyes full of everything she was not saying. He thought, I almost missed it. He thought I didn't. Outside the compound gate, the city went on. Children on bicycles, a woman selling ground nuts, the sound of a generator. Lagos was 500 kilometers away, and everything that had happened there felt in this moment like a story that had happened to someone else, someone younger, less certain, less lucky. Nkechi leaned her head against his shoulder. He wrapped his arm around her. In his mother-in-law's kitchen, someone had started cooking, and the smell of pepper soup drifted into the courtyard, warm and pungent and full of home. Chinara, in her grandfather's arms, opened her eyes, really opened them, not the unfocused flutter of a newborn, but with intention, with the particular clarity of a child, just starting to understand that there is a world, and looked, for a long, serious moment, at her father. He looked back. She blinked, made a small sound of decision, closed her eyes again. He smiled. He had never in 34 years felt so completely in the right place. Screen fades slowly to black. Soft Nigerian highlife music rises, a guitar melody, warm and circular, the kind that sounds like something remembered. Final text on screen, white on black, one line at a time. True love finds its way back. Even when the world tries to tear it apart. Even when fear speaks louder than hope. Even when the road is very, very long. Music plays out, end card appears. 3:25:00. Warm, reflective. And that, friends, is the full story of Chinedu and Nkechi, a story about sacrifice and silence, about love that survives the distance fear puts between 2 people, and about the courage it takes to choose, in front of a room full of witnesses, the thing that is real over the thing that is comfortable. If this story moved you, if it reminded you of someone or something, or some moment in your own life when love asked something hard of you, please like this video, share it with someone who needs to hear it today, and subscribe with notifications on. We bring you new stories every week. Leave a heart in the comments if you believe second chances are real, And until next time, take care of each other. It matters more than you